Okay, welcome everybody here in the auspices of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Today we'll start a cycle of, let's say, meetings with the French scientists, and not only scientists, but also with some other duties, which is organized jointly by the French Institute here in Sofia and the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Particularly for the first visit, I would like to really thank the director of the Institute, Fabien Fleury, because he gave the strong push so that our guest today could come in Sofia. So it's my pleasure to introduce Седрик Вилани in a couple of words. First, he is a brilliant mathematician. I'm sure that most of you already saw what he did. His professional life started, let's start with the preparatory class in Lycée Louis-le-Grand. Then he was admitted in the École Normale Supérieure at Paris. And then he made his PhD in Paris Dauphine with supervisor Pierre-Louis Lyons. You know, probably all of you, that he was awarded in 2010 the Fields Medal in mathematics for his works in partial differential equations in statistical mechanics, and more specifically for Landau damping in Boltzmann equation. But he has also interest in Riemannian geometry, optimal transportation, and other mathematical fields. But second, he is probably one of the most impassioned ambassadors of mathematics, and not only mathematics, but also science, not only in France, but all over the world. In the last more than 8 years, he has been spending most of his time popularizing mathematical sciences, and not only mathematical science, physical science at all, particularly among young people, with many lectures in schools, in universities, but also on the radio. He had several radio emissions, TV emissions. In cinema, if I'm well informed, there is also a Cine Club now in Paris, Cinquième. So he became a member of the national. Couple of words which are not exhaustive, of course. He's a member also of the French Academy of Sciences. He has many other awards. I only mentioned several of them. I give the floor to Седрик. This will be very, very informal meeting. He will decide what to do and where to be, whether here or if you want to take the floor there. It's up to you. It's up to you. So please, Седрик. If you want to walk, this probably also works.
Yes. Is it on? Everybody hear me? Let's do it democratically, my friends. Do you prefer me down or up? Up. So those who want to vote for up, raise your hand. Down now, raise your hand. Okay. Let's go up. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. As you can see, I start by keeping my promise of obeying to the vote of the audience, which is good habit of politicians. Let me say a few more words about my training. In my training of mathematician, there are three kinds of influence. When it comes to geographic, I would say, influence. First, I am a product of the French system, and even if teaching of mathematics in medium high school or high school currently has a lot of trouble in France, our higher education system is still on top in mathematics. And France remains #1 country in the world when you count the number of international awards in mathematics divided by the population. I mean, awards in research, things such as the Fields Medal, Abel Prize, and so on. Even if you count in absolute value, second in terms of the number of Fields Medals, just after United States. Second in terms of quality of published research. Second in terms of the number of invited lecturers in the international conferences in research of mathematics. So still very strong. In this higher education system, the influence of foreigners is also very important. I mean, we have quite a number of professors coming from outside, coming from the outside world, even though not as many as in other systems as in United States, for instance. So I'm a product of the French system, made my PhD in the analysis of partial differential equations and in theory of Boltzmann equation, a subject in which France's contribution has been very strong. Let's say that France, United States, Italy are maybe the three countries in which it is most developed. My advisor, Pierre Williams, was himself already a Fields medalist. His father was a very famous mathematician who worked a lot on transforming the institutions in France for research. And there are some other people who influenced me very much who are also in this French ecosystem. But I was also trained through travels across Europe. In my first important collaborations, my most important first works when I was at the beginning of my PhD were with collaborators from Italy and Germany. And later, I worked a lot and traveled a lot around Europe for collaborations. And third influence was the American ecosystem. I was a visiting professor in Georgia Tech, Atlanta, as early as 26 years old, and it was very important in my career. I spent a semester there. Then I was a visiting professor in Berkeley, twice for a semester each. I was a visiting professor in Princeton University, and each of these stays, especially the first three, had an enormous impact on my career with the people that I met, the subject that I could tackle, the books that I wrote, the new problems that came to me and that I could work on. Without all these travels, there was no possibility for me to get the Fields Medal, just because I would have not had the good problems, the good reflexes, the good ideas. Traveling is a mandatory part of the research of mathematicians, and you see this in all the famous mathematicians nowadays. This was for the training. Now let me see also some things about the subject. When I was a high school student, my favorite mathematics subject was geometry. And I thought there was nothing more beautiful than working on geometry theorems. But later, when I went into higher education, I fell in love with algebra. And it was a surprise that a couple of years later, when came the moment, the time to specialize myself for higher education and research, I chose in the end analysis, and more especially partial differential equations. In the meantime, my taste had evolved, and also I had been exposed to other teachers. And I started in mathematical physics, even though I was not very gifted in physics. And even in the subject, kinetic theory of gases, that is related to thermodynamics, a subject which I thought was completely boring when I studied it after the end of high school. But you never know what you will do in the end, and sometimes you meet a course or a different way to look at things. Sometimes there is randomness, and you go in a direction that you did not expect. And there was a lot of randomness in the choice of my subject. Now, when I started, I was very much focused at the beginning So it was the study of Boltzmann equation, which is an equation going back to the end of the 19th century. Boltzmann was an Austrian physicist, one of the fathers of atomic theory, and his equation is used to predict the evolution of density, disorder, temperature inside a gas, rarefied gas. When I started to work on this, I was very much concerned about what we can do. It was important that there will be applications for my research. And I asked this to my advisor, what are the applications and so on. And Boltzmann equation is used in the aeronautic industry, used for the space shuttle or whatever, used also in problems of physics occurring in a number of technological situations. And when I started to work on this, it was important, but later I discovered that in my heart, I did not really care whether it had applications or not. I thought that actually the subject was much more beautiful than I expected. And I discovered there was a lot of mathematical problems within, fundamental problems, which were still to solve, that it was at the heart of a number of techniques, and that there was a lot of mystery inside the mathematical theory of that Boltzmann equation. I started to discover more and more problems. At the beginning, of course, when you start your PhD, you understand close to nothing about what is occurring. You don't understand the questions that your advisor is asking you. You don't understand the research seminars when you are attending them. You don't even understand what is the problem. You know, before finding the solution, you have to understand exactly what is the question. And at the beginning, even that is a big problem. But it's the magic of PhD. After 3 years of intensive training, teaching, discussing with people, talking and traveling, etc., you end up being the specialist of your subject. Very often you change the question from what was asked by your PhD. And the most important elements of my PhD, for sure, were not those that were initially asked at the beginning of my PhD. By the way, in science, very often you have these things of big discoveries that are made by students going either on different sides than their advisor or opposite to what their advisor thinks or develops. Let me also say that one important, very important ingredient in my career, almost from the beginning, was teaching. And I had an inordinate taste for teaching. Teaching is an important part of research. Teaching is the best way to learn by far. So whenever I had to change subject or go to a new direction, I made sure that I could teach the new subject that I was going in, because it was the best way to get into it. In particular, at some point, I did some bifurcation from kinetic theory of gases to the theory of optimal transport of probability measures. It's a field that started from applications, started from engineer problems in the 18th century about how to transport some matter from one initial configuration to a final configuration, spending the least possible amount of energy. And it's a subject that diversified over the decades and centuries to go in a number of directions and branches, a very active subject. By some series of coincidences and pieces of luck, I happened to make a quite nice contribution together with some German collaborator in the subject. I mean, really a coincidence, because it turned out that at just a few weeks of interval, I was attending to a seminar by that German colleague and then reading a book by a French researcher and understanding that there was a close relation between these two subjects, even though it was not clear at the beginning. And this connection was the opportunity of a new theorem, and then the beginning of a new field. One of these connections that took just a few days of work, and in the end ended being one of my papers, actually my research paper that is most quoted to this day. So an illustration of the fact that in research, it's not just about how strong you are, of course. It's also about being in the right place at the right moment, having some luck and helping the luck, and meeting people and making connections and whatever. And after that, after I presented some of these results to a colleague in Atlanta, I was invited to give a course in that subject. And I chose to give a whole course in the whole subject of optimal transportation, even though I knew only a small part of it. And that course turned into a book, and then another book, which now I recognize are the two most used books for synthesis in this field. And it was really the opportunity for me to learn about this subject. After that, my research diversified in a number of directions, starting from analysis of partial differential equations. I went more into fields such as functional analysis, then probability theories of some kind, then geometry. I came back to geometry, but that time that was non-Euclidean geometry in relation with probability and optimization. I was very lucky to be among a small group of researchers who discovered that there was a close link between the notion of curvature in geometry, the notion of entropy in statistical physics related to the disorder, and the notion of minimization of the effort coming from economy or operational research. And it was a real surprise that these three fields, which date from different periods, different people, were so closely related, and it was a way to solve some problems, for instance, problems of geometry that had been standing open for quite a large time. And this played an important role in my diversification of activities. It is, however, however, the Fields Medal, it was for mathematical physics that it was awarded, not only the work on the Boltzmann equation and gas theory, but also my work on stability in plasmas. Together with one of my former students, Clément Mouot, we found the mathematical justification for the so-called Landau damping, named after the very famous Russian mathematician Lev Landau, who studied this in the 30s and 40s. And we found that a way to justify mathematically this Landau damping in some regime which was out of the usual justification. It resulted in a lot of efforts, a proof that is the largest which I ever made, like 150 pages of dense mathematical formulas and reasoning, and a real adventure which I wrote in a book which I hear now has been translated, so far has been translated in about a dozen languages, which tells the adventure of mathematical research, not from the point of view of mathematics, but from the point of view of adventure. During the 2.5 years that I worked on this problem of stability in plasma physics, from the first day in which we had the idea to work on this, which was not on our plans at all, to the final day where the paper is accepted in the research journal, and in which I have been awarded some international awards for this discovery. And like adventure, because it is really an adventure, the research, full of setbacks, of mistakes, of unexpected things, of small miracles, etc. Also from the point of view of the community, because research is always a collective endeavor. And in the book, there are many portraits of colleagues, tales about how it is to be here or there, in which environment, and so on. And also a very personal book, of course, in which emotion is put at the first, because this is what drives, ultimately, research. The Fields Medal gave me an enormous exposition, and I thought it was my duty to accept this exposition and to go on a number of activities. conferences and lectures and teaching, but also going on television, going on the radio, being in some movies, as it was mentioned by Julian, and also every kind of new activity I could think of. I collaborated with comic authors, artists, which was a great experience. I worked on producing some DVDs for mathematical outreach. I became director of a research institute that is very much focused also on communication and on the link between science and society. I created some new activities in this structure, managed to lobby a lot of money from the government, founded some contracts with a number of companies, started some projects of developing mathematical presentations through augmented reality with the famous HoloLens technology from Microsoft, etc. A lot of activities at the interface of science and society. However, the last turn of my life, which was mentioned, was not at all expected. It was going into politics, which had been on my mind for a long time at the European level. I've been a European militant since 2010, and I consider myself as a federalist, as they say. That is, people who believe that the future of nations in Europe has to go through a much better integrated coordination within Europe, and has to be within the culture, within the science, within the medicine, within a number of things, and that we are many years away from such a thing. However, and so I always thought when I would like to go into real politics, that is, apply, be elected or whatever, it would be at European level. However, it turned out that in the end it was at national level. At the occasion of the French presidential elections, the last one, and in which I was a supporter of the current president and then a run for parliament. And now I'm a member of parliament. It was not on my plans. 1 year ago, yes, 1 year ago, I did not think I would run for elections. And then in May, I did run. I was elected in June, started immediately to work like crazy together with all my colleagues on voting the law and started a number of reforms. Then was given to work on one report for the government on the teaching of mathematics, was given to work on a report on for the government for artificial intelligence, given also to work on the evolution of the structures doing the interface between science and politics inside the parliament. Also had to work on a number of political local files in my district, which is in which there is the construction of a new kind of university. This had me work a lot on this at the interface of science and politics. I consider it's one of my special duties here to do everything to reinforce the relation between the science and the politics. At European level, I was at some point member of the Scientific Advisory Board for the European Commission and did some work there, but it's nothing in terms of quantity compared to what I am doing currently at the French level. Of course, it's always teamwork. I have a team working with me on all my general political activities, but also a team that worked with me for the report on the mathematical education, another team that worked with me for the report on artificial intelligence, another team working with me for the parliamentary scientific office. So this is 4 teams that have to coordinate and work in harmony together. I lost complete control on my schedule. Now the teams work on it and they just inform me of what they decided for me, even all the constraints and so on. And even if there is all these new constraints which have come into my life, it is an extremely extremely interesting and enriching in terms of discovering new things experience for me. This is all for the presentation. Let's continue on the mode of the conversation and whatever question or remark you would have on any subject that I touched or any subject that you think it would be interesting to discuss with me, I will be glad to answer. Thank you.
So I think there are several microphones. So feel free, to ask whether to ask or to come to a microphone to pose a question, or to not only a question, to make a comment. Well, Professor Dimov.
Thank you. So, Professor Villani, please tell me, how do you consider the idea of this European idea of chief advisory boards, the idea to try to educate politicians? I mean, when scientists are, trying to educate them, to help them to take correct solutions. So what's your opinion about that? Is it possible, and when it is possible? Thank you.
At national, international level?
At European level, at both European level.
European level, yes.
You know that Sir Peter, who was advisor to the British government,
yes,
was trying to do something like that.
Yes.
And this idea now is a little bit sort of forgotten. But what's your opinion about that?
Yes. There has... Let's go back in time for this idea of the scientific advice to the government. It's a rather old idea, but which had to be renewed depending on the context and the period. Of course, it happened for very, very long that heads of states or leaders had some technical advisors in a number of circumstances, or for some missions, or for some wars, or whatever. But it becomes much more organized and institutionalized when there is the, let's say, scientific revolution in the 17th century. And at that time occur the first Academies of Sciences. One of their roles was to advise the government. First one was in Italy, and then came the one in England and France. And the ones in England and France were very much created with a view of efficiency, competition, and providing the good scientific advice to the king, either the king of England or the king of France, and the two countries saw themselves very much in competition, of course. And over the next decades and centuries, these academies did play some role. Currently, it's this role of the academies as a support for the political activities globally has much decayed. One of the reasons is that science has increased very, very much. Academies have become large bodies. Consensus within one academy is slow. Politicians need very fast advice. And anyway, usually it's separate worlds, the world of the academies, the world of the politicians. By the way, I am the only member currently to be at the same time in Parliament and in Academy of Sciences in France. It's rather rare. And at some point in 20th century, there is formalized the idea that there is it's better to have an official science advisor who spends a lot of time directly with the head of state, has the culture, has the contacts, is helped by an administration and a number of scientists, and does this role of fast transmission. The most famous, clearly, of such these advisors is the one for the President of the United States, position which is created in the middle of 20th century when the United States understand that science is key for the geopolitics, that science was key for the Second World War and so on. And Second World War still remains the archetype example of event which could not have, in which science played a decisive role for the and consequences at the world level. The Chief Science Advisor of the United States played a very important role in this for several decades, actually, since the election of President Trump, who suppressed this position without any consultation. A number of other countries have developed during second half of 20th century mechanisms for advising the head of state. Apart from academies, the two main mechanisms are either a scientific board meeting regularly, maybe under the supervision of the Minister of Sciences or Prime Minister. One example that works very well is in Japan. Prime Minister very regularly organizes meetings with the scientists from the advisory board, and there are compte rendu, and there is discussion about the science and technology, meeting policy, meeting politics policy. Another case, another example is in Germany. You have the Rathenau Institute, which does advice for the parliament or advice for the government, and is externalized body of science which is given missions. Like, we want an opinion on this, what can you say? And here comes the report back, etc. And another model is the Chief Science Advisor, in which you have this one person that is really detached to be permanently at the contact of the president or prime minister or whatever, and transmits the information and the knowledge from the science. At European level now, at some point there was try for a chief science advisor, and President Barroso had a chief science advisor, and that chief science advisor, that was Mrs. Anne Glover, had a scientific board helping her. And I was a member of that first scientific board. And I could see from the inside that the formula did not work. It did not work for several reasons. First, that there was institutionally, let's say, some kind of competition between the chief science advisor and the commissioner for science and higher education. And also from the fact that there was too much discrepancy between the scale of the meeting of the board, that was rather, regular but rather slow, and the pace of the action of the chief science advisor, that was constantly working and acting on fast pace. And in the end, it was not very satisfactory, and it was decided not to renew it. The new formula that is currently in place is a scientific advisory board. The scientific advisory board is made of a reduced number of scientists, just 7 of them, meeting at rather frequent pace and working on missions and questions which are given by the commissioners under the authority of the science commissioner, Carlos Moedas. And it uses a scientific mechanism for producing the opinions and activities in which the European Academies of Science play an important role. I think this is a good formula, even though it still remains to make an important work for the regular contact between that level and between the top level of the Commission. For instance, it is striking that there are almost no contacts between this Scientific Advisory Board and President Juncker himself. In these matters, it's not just to have the institutions, it's also the culture and the will to do something. I told you about the example of Japan. We see that there are very regular meetings by the Prime Minister, and you can find the official accounts online of what occurred in the meeting, etc. While the symmetric institution in France, which theoretically is chaired by the Prime Minister and exists in practice, has not been gathered for at least 4 years by the Prime Minister. And you see here, question of culture, discipline, and so on. And I also worked on this in France. We are not in a satisfactory situation in this respect. Actually, in many countries, it could be much better than it is now. And I hope that we will do things better. And I know that currently President Macron has started the reflection so that there is a system of chief science advisor that is placed beneath him for permanent advice.
First of all, thank you very much for this great opportunity. My question will be a little bit more scientific, as I'm more still from the research part, not still in the political, like Professor Dimov. So you mentioned nonlinear fluid dynamics modeling, and we nowadays people claim that we are living in the digital society. So my question is like that: how do you feel classical methods for such kind of complex system modeling are fitting new challenges, especially for the future? Because we, as a research bodies, both Institute of Mathematics and Institute of Computer Science, are trying to model the future about some kind of cyber-physical system. So I will be curious, as a mathematician, what's your opinion about such kind of classical differential equations approaching towards this? Because the future is always fascinating us. Thank you.
Thank you. That is one of the most fundamental questions of today about the evolution of science, scientific spirit, scientific practice. First, again, let's take the broad perspective. Differential equations emerged in the 17th century as a way to predict natural phenomena. It was about gravitation, it was about fluids from the 18th century on, and little by little, 19th century, 20th century, all kinds of phenomena were put under the use of differential equations for prediction. And differential equations changed the world. Now, in the middle of 20th century arrived the revolution of computer. And computer science had enormous consequences, not only on our life, but also on the science. In the first step, it reinforced tremendously the importance of differential equations because it gave tools to efficiently compute the solutions of differential equations, be it ordinary differential equations or partial differential equations, and make them applicable everywhere. Current meteorology, which is so important for a number of reasons, is based on the combination of computers and differential equations. But also, virtually all of the, not all, but the huge part of research and development in the industry is based also on this combination of computer science, let's say, computer science, experiments, and differential equations. It's on a three-leg that this process rests. And for some time, it grew and grew like this, to the point that some people started to say things such as, okay, but now that we can compute solutions of differential equations, we don't need to learn about them through the classical hard way. We can take out the theoretical problems and concentrate on the practical problems of computing them. And of course, that is completely false. That is completely false because you still have to understand the equations on theoretical level, be able to play with them. There are a number of equations that will be solved without understanding them deeply, that is for sure. But still, there is need for a theoretical reflection and to have this dual culture, the computation and the theoretical is still very important. Even though we know there are problems that are still extremely vexing, for instance, in fluid mechanics, such as basic theory for regularity about this. And it would be completely foolish to say that we cannot work on the numerical simulation before we have understood the regularity. But all this has to continue simultaneously. The most theoretical, the most applied, and everything that is in between, and it has is a destiny that all these sectors talk to each other. Now, more recently came another huge change in the way to think of science and research and engineering. Also coming indirectly from the computers, and that is the revolution of big data. Big data and machine learning and artificial intelligence with a number of complex processes that can be handled with respect to predictions without having to use a model. And this also came with the illusion for many people that maybe we can forget about the models. Forget not only about the theory, but also about the computation of the models. Forget about the Navier-Stokes equation and just look at data about fluids. Or in the field of finance, it would be like, let's forget about the stochastics, the stochastic theory, which had been at the basis of theoretical finance for decades and decades, and just see data, forget about the model and use the data. And this attitude, of course, is very sensitive. First, it would be stupid to believe that we can get rid of the models. We still need the models, they will still be useful. But we have to acknowledge that in many situations, this data-based approach without any model has given much better and much more efficient results than the classical approach based on models. In the field of finance, for instance, you can see some hedge funds which were created, which say, let's forget about the economy, forget about the models, just see the data, analyze the data, extract the data, do statistics and statistics. And we've seen that statisticians, which traditionally were seen with a bit of contempt, to say the truth, by other fields of mathematics, now are the most high-ranked in some way, the ones who get the most opportunities, the highest salaries in the private sector, and so on. And globally, the whole of science has said, let's move from a causal-based approach to a correlation-based approach. And so far, it has given much better results in many languages. Automatic translation is one of these very vexing examples. I do believe, however, that, and many colleagues do believe also, that there will come the time in which we need to combine all this to get real good results. Combine the equations, the models with the data, and the rest maybe. In the same time as than to be a great, speaker, writer, write discourses and so on, you need both to be exposed to the examples and to have courses about the grammar, about how to organize things, etc. It will not be easy because data-based approach and model-based approach are very different in their spirit. These are often very different people, and the theories are very difficult to mix. And this challenge may also be a challenge to understand how we do it, to use a combination of things which are learned from experience and things which are taught by masters in some sense.
Professor, thanks very much for the talk. So my question is kind of two parts. So the first question is, what's the latest development and probably some found discoveries in the field of artificial intelligence? Because I think it's very much fascinating for myself, and I hope for the rest of the young students. And the second part is kind of pessimistic view, because it's like, do you think that artificial intelligence will be used as kind of a war weapon? Because you mentioned that throughout the world, the Second World War, the atomic bomb was used, and it was a really nice kick in nuclear physics. The
Yes.
artificial intelligence is the same kick in computer science. So what's your thoughts on that? Thank
Very
you.
good. These are very good questions. In artificial intelligence, there has been recently a long list of new techniques, new methods, new tricks which occurred. The basics of artificial intelligence nowadays is vexingly simple. I mean, for instance, there's a big deal about deep learning. And deep learning, which is these neural networks, has been extraordinarily successful. But when you go into the field of deep learning, you are very much surprised to discover that it's a field in which essentially there is just one equation. The backpropagation equation, as people say, which is a gradient flow approach, and in particular, much less theory at the core than there is, for instance, in classical fluid mechanics or in other areas of science, which have been worked on and on and on. Of course, science is not just the theory, the core equation. Science is also a lot of how to implement things, what tricks, what methodology, etc. And this is where has been a lot of the innovation in the past decades. The algorithms of deep learning became very famous and came back in the international community just a few years ago, 2012. And it was very sudden that people realized that their efficiency was very strong. But the principles of the algorithms used by Yann Lequin or Yosha Benjo or their collaborators goes back to the 80s. And it's basically the same algorithms, just now used with different methodologies, different material, more powerful machines, etc. Apart from the basic principles, I told you there is a lot of methodology and points of view which occurred. There are dozens of them. And some of them are fascinating. Let me quote Yann Lequin, who is for sure the most internationally most famous French expert on artificial intelligence. And he said that in his view, the most clever advance in artificial intelligence in the past decade was that of adversarial learning, with adversarial-like adversaries, in which there are not one but two neural networks which are in competition with each other. One is like the master, the other is like the student. They play against each other. The student wants to prove to the master that he is very good by answering all the questions. The master wants to prove to the student that he's not yet up to the level by asking him all kinds of questions, including tricky questions which contain traps. And in this kind of competition between the two, they learn very fast. So it's a combination, let's say, of classical neural network and game theory. This field, for me, is all the more fascinating that it happened recently to incorporate the area of research in which I did work, optimal transport. And it was a shock for me, let me say, to see my name in the reference list of some of these papers in New Trends in Artificial Intelligence, because I thought that my research had nothing to do with artificial intelligence. But you never know. That's the beauty of mathematics. Everything can have application in anything, or almost. There are a number of other situations and variants, and for sure there will be things coming from there that will be very innovative and surprising. However, so far, we have to admit it, the mysteries are still very deep inside why methods in artificial intelligence recently worked so well. And it's like a field which works very well, but has not understood why. It's kind of the contrary of what historically computers were for. I told you about differential equations, and I insisted on the fact that the first use of computers was for solving differential equations. With people like Shannon or Turing, they all thought, what equations will we feed the machine? We have to use them to solve differential equations. For Neumann also. And it was things like, we understand the theory of the differential equations, but we don't know how to compute them. And now it's kind of the reverse. It's like we know how to compute the results of artificial intelligence, but we don't understand the theory. The theory is still to be constructed. One of the most fascinating recent books on this subject, in my opinion, is the one of Leslie Valiant, one of the great theoreticians of computer science who got the Turing Award, American. And Leslie Valiant had some very wild speculations about how a good theory of emergence of solution in artificial intelligence should parallel a good theory of emergence of structure in a number of other phenomena in life, including evolution of species, by the way. And for sure, I believe that the most interesting things will come from a surprise direction and development in this area. Now, you ask whether artificial intelligence will be used in war machines. Let's not be naive, it will. Every technology that is efficient has been used in wartime. And one of my friends either told me something like, you know, usually the first application of a mathematical theorem when there is an application is in the military. And when you have to think about, it is not so easy to find counterexamples. Cryptography, the first examples, of course, were in military, and the first, let's say, real-life applications of many problems in number theory were in the field of cryptography and so on. You pointed out the example of nuclear energy, and indeed, the first application of nuclear energy was not nuclear plant, but nuclear bomb, and so on and so far. So, of course, there are already programs of incorporating artificial intelligence in the defense, and these largest programs for sure are run in the United States and now in China. And but not only there. France is one of the countries in which there has been tradition of artificial intelligence for a long time, and to this day there is a very good tradition of research in France in artificial intelligence, even top level, even though we are far behind the United States or some other countries in terms of applications of these techniques and economic application. And one of the challenges in the report that I am in charge for the government is to give suggestions to improve this competitivity at French and European levels. But to come back to the question, yes, there will be applications of artificial intelligence to military, both attack and defense. And even if you don't want to use it aggressively, you have to understand how it is used aggressively to be able to defend yourself. And this will sometimes, this military side will be on things which can be virtually destructive. I mean, cyber attacks, cyber security, etc. We know that you can take one country down by cyber attacks. But some of them will also be in combat, like for destroying machines or destroying people or whatever. And it is important to keep in mind some things. First, there is some international laws regarding wars, regarding defense, and so on. It's very important to continue this effort of structuring the laws of war, etc. And artificial intelligence should not be considered out of this set of rules, but inside. Secondly, whatever new technology you have, it's important to have in defense or in any other place, human responsibility. Never say that the person that is responsible is the machine. There should always be, in military defense, there should be a general or a president or whatever that is responsible of some decision, the use of some algorithm, whatever, and that can be held responsible in case something horrible is made with this technology. Some people will say, oh yes, but there are these things that artificial intelligence works with algorithms that are not explicable, that organize themselves so that even the programmer does not know which are the critical and so on. Doesn't matter. Even with this, there has to be somebody responsible who takes the decision knowing all this and knowing also the fact that there is some missing information and reliability that may be like this or like that, etc. And for this and for any other kind of use of artificial intelligence, we need some ethical reflection that has to be as independent as possible as political power. I advise for the creation, in the report, we'll advise for the creation of a committee of ethics, national, that will give recommendations and analysis of good use and bad use of artificial intelligence. In the UK, they already have this, they already said they will have also this ethics committee. I believe there should be it should be widespread throughout Europe and probably with a European coordination. Maybe not one European ethics committee, but a European coordination of national ethics committees. We know from example of other countries that sometimes the artificial intelligence comes with very bad consequences. The most famous of the books against this recently published is the one by Casey O'Neill in America, Weapons of Mass Destruction, which brilliantly analyzes a number of cases, especially in the United States, in which some very clever and sophisticated algorithms of artificial intelligence were used with bad consequences. Either because they were used wrongly, and with a bad control, with lack of rigor, so that they don't do the right stuff, and this has big consequences, and it's easy with artificial intelligence to make mistakes in the use. Or because they were used in a way that was efficient, but without the good ethical and moral safeguards. And it's something that young generation have to keep in mind. In the future, we should not be naive. We should protect the interest, not think that the cyber world is all cool and gentle, and think of the moral and ethical issues. But at the same time, be daring and experienced and neither diabolize people or institutions.
Well, the program is really very tight of Седрик Вилани, but let's see whether there is a short last question.
Here, last question at second rank here.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank you for the great talk today. And as for my question, I think it would be fair to say that there is a certain stigma around science, especially among us young people these days. I would like to ask you, what do you think is the cause of this stigma, and what can be done about it?
When you say stigma, you mean the idea that science? Do you mean the? Yeah, please make it a bit more precise when you say stigma.
Okay. Sorry. So by stigma, I mean that young people seem to get turned off by science very easily. It isn't a popular thing nowadays.
Yes, there's a number of reasons, but it is seen all around the world that science gets less and less popular. Science is less considered something cool. Science is associated with, I don't know, either boring things or technology that is malevolent or whatever. The same people who think this way will often use a lot of science and technology passively without realizing or minimizing the importance of science and technology in their environment. Now, but what you ask is really the cause for this, not whether it's justified or not. It's clear it's not justified, but what are the causes? First, science is hard. I mean, people say, okay, don't worry, it's simple. So no, let's face it, guys, it's just hard. Mathematics is very hard. It needs a lot of focus, concentration, it needs passion, it needs effort. And you cannot understand the subtle mechanisms without effort, and making a scientist requires years and years of efforts. Now, of course, it's a good investment because the world is longing for scientists. All the companies everywhere, they say, we need more scientists, we need more specialists, please send them, we cannot, we need experts, etc. So it's a long investment, but then it's a good investment. But people do not realize this. They say, okay, it's painful, it's difficult, many years, and they think there should be a way to get a good position in society, to get rich that is faster and simpler. By the way, nowadays you get a lot of these advertisements on internet with people telling that they will gladly share with you for just a little bit of money the secret to become rich, famous in an effortless way, etc. The second thing is that science is hard to transmit because of the technical language. And science also appears to be too much, let's say, logical, too cold, whatever. It has bad reputation for all of this. We know that science, in fact, is full of emotions, driven by dream and curiosity, full of nice experiments, full of potential. And we have to change the narrative about science, admitting that it is hard, but insisting on the fact that it's so beautiful and full of rewards. It's a job for the governments, for the societies, for everybody. Let me say something a bit special about Eastern European countries. And it's clear there has been, everybody agrees, it has been very hard to negotiate the end of communism and the relation of science and politics in this respect. During all the very tough years of communism, science in many European countries, and especially in Russia, which I consider to be part of Europe, even though politically currently it's a bit tricky, there was a lot of appetite for science. Governments were intelligent enough to give a lot of funding to scientists. scientists understood that being good at science was the only way to travel, to be able to work freely in some sense. It's amazing to see that in some countries in which the politics was extremely tough, there was a lot of freedom in the way to do science, and very clear in the success and development of this. In the case of Russia, it's amazing to see that at the peak of political tyranny was also peak of scientific originality. It's amazing what these guys have done in those days. Then arrived the end of communism, and politically it all changed. And in most Eastern European countries, the scientific institutions saw budgets decline, motivations decline. There was very strong tradition of Olympiads and very high-level specialized teaching for the most gifted students, and all this had tendency to drop in all of these countries. And I don't know about the particular situation in Bulgaria, but my colleagues from Poland, from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia, from everywhere, they told me the same thing about this. And it's important now to find the new motivations for the scientists to emerge, which will not be motivations here that are in reaction to a context, but really driven by the beauty of the science and science in itself. So that's a challenge for you guys.
Yes. Let me, on behalf of all of you, thank Седрик Вилани for accepting this really very short, unfortunately for us, visit to Bulgaria. He will be leaving tomorrow. And to thank for your last words. For sure, I will convey them to our politicians to see what the result will be, because we need really such kind of behavior on behalf of our government and also parliament. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you.
Politik, da može